Hey friends, in today's video I want to discuss my matchmaking experience as of late, mostly this season, and sort of piggyback off of True Vanguard's video. I understand the subject I'm discussing today has no real solution, but regardless, I want to vent a little in hopes that the devs use this feedback to stem the bleeding of the PvP population in future droughts, because this is not going to be the only one. I understand that players are not playing PvP right now because they're prepping for Final Shape, or they're focusing on the FOMO of Into the Light, etc. I get it. But regardless, it still shouldn't be this bad. One thing I want to clear up, just like the True Vanguard video, he states in that video, is that the devs want PvP to remain an integral part of Destiny 2. So why do I personally care about PvP? It's after clearing PvE activities more than once, I typically find them boring, which is what drives me to focus and improve at PvP. The better I get at PvP, the more competitive options open up, and to get that gear, I'm forced to pull a PvE slot machine lever to acquire the gear. And in other words, I'm not a fan of the current loot and difficulty systems of PvE, so until those are drastically improved, in my eyes, PvE is the side activity, and PvP is the main course. It's Destiny 2, Eightfall.
I just wish this
It's
It's alright.
One variable I want to get out of the way in regards to this discussion is that I recognize that I'm a high-skill content creator, which means that I'm recognized in public lobbies all the time. This means that players often act differently around me, whether that's solo supering me to potentially win a match better, or just like to get a reaction, to shoot me in the back as a teammate, or teabag, emote, something like that to get my attention, and they're just not playing the way they normally would without my influence in the lobby. As a result, I have many alt accounts that I cycle through for a more organic experience, and it is certainly better, but I'm not making content on those accounts, so I typically play setups that are fun and somewhat effective, so they have higher stats under the hood, which leads to more strict lobby balancing. So I'm going to say both experiences are very similar, but for slightly different reasons. So now let me articulate what the problem is right now. Matchmaking, for whatever reason in general, cannot find players that fit the right mix of connection quality and skill to prevent outliers from matching, or the outlier protection just isn't strict enough. The low population effectively makes it highly likely that the matchmaking search will expand so much that it grabs players outside the ideal criteria just because it thinks that any match is better than none. After that, then the team balancing kicks in. Right now they're using the snake draft system, but I don't think it's making a big difference for me, which I hope is good feedback. Before, it was an average system which tried to have the teams average with their under the hood skill rating. Regardless, I'm of the opinion that the skill rating system in the game is not accurate enough for either lobby balancing scheme to be good enough. Think of the many variables that can sway a match regardless of expected skill rating. In order of significance, we have Fireteams present, communication from randoms, highest skill players actively trying to win, well in bubble distribution this specific season, someone with Lumina Boots of the Assembler, a floating scout rifle Dawnblade anchor, knowledge to create or prevent a spawn trap, or where the power ammo is and just how many people on your team know that, the amount of no time to explain Teraba, Ace of Spades on each team, counter super success rate, like if I prevent a Dawnblade from getting a 7th column, that might sway a match to otherwise mercy a team that would be a close match. I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we are in a low population situation, and that can lead to bad connections and longer queues, but even despite that, I've had mostly fast queues. I think the longest one was 9 minutes, 10 minutes is the Mongoose error code. Regardless, all of the above can combine to create not just an unwinnable, but unplayable match. This is why a mercy rule exists. Even so, I feel that the mercy rule is too soon, and matches aren't long enough to give the possibility of a genuine comeback. When players feel helpless, the following cycle is created. First, skill is not measured accurately enough, so lobby balancing doesn't do enough, which leads to a feeling of helplessness, which leads to AFK or quitting to get to the next match sooner. Players sick of this quit altogether, and the overall population dwindles. Matchmaking then takes longer to eventually provide yet another imbalanced match that leads to quitting, which perpetuates the cycle. Semi-related, I feel like there is a quitter shadow ban that prioritizes that player to backfill matches more often. Ironically, I find join in progress matches to be the most fair and playable matches, so it wouldn't surprise me if other players also came to that same conclusion. Ultimate question is, what can be changed to end the quitter cycle? Definitely not a quitter penalty. That won't change anything. Players will either just AFK or outright quit PvP altogether if they're getting punished for avoiding a not great situation. Extremely strict skill-based matchmaking also won't solve it, since it will create a whole host of new issues that I'm not going into right now. Overall sandbox balancing does help, but a meta will develop regardless. In general, the PvP offerings in this game are on a spectrum, from the most hardcore modes like Checkmate to the most casual like Mayhem. Control is supposed to be somewhere in the middle, the medium option, but I still feel it lands too close to Mayhem when it's all said and done. This allows for the inevitable high-skill opponent to abuse casual elements in a way that the game implodes when both sides match that meta. Some examples include pulling out your sword hilt for extra movement or third-personing. Back when 6 Behemoth Titans were meta, you would see that every now and then. The seasonal artifact is another pain point. We've had so many, whatever the opposite of banger is, from the seasonal artifact. I really hope that they disable it. Back on track, ultimately, I think that skill evaluation formula needs to be reevaluated for both solo and fireteam influence on a match outcome. I feel that the current system has too much of a bias towards high skill players positively influencing a match without giving enough weight to how lower skill players can negatively influence match outcomes. All that being said, players are not robots. They don't look at a 150 to 149 match and are happy they won, despite getting 2 kills and going 25 deaths. In addition, I'd like to see a 4v4 format experimented in Control, and maybe even move to comp. I feel like this would allow an easier time for matchmaking when you have to account for 4 less players per lobby. Also, I feel like the game flows a lot better, it's a lot readable, and a lot less frustrating. A lot less snowbally too. It holds true for other competitive games, but when a competitive playlist is healthy, the casual playlist is healthier by proxy, since high-skill players will prefer to spend their time in comp instead. And when the modes are so jarringly obviously different, I believe it influences player culture in a positive manner. Currently, the competitive playlist has so many issues with it that I couldn't do it justice in a 10-minute video, let alone an hour one. Finally, I'd like to see a freelance option implemented, or like freelance preference in matchmaking, because right now I am matching too many teams. Fireteams lead to a predictably bad experience. I feel like I'm psychic when I can pick out which of the 2 fireteams will be on my team. I also asked around politely regarding if the high skill fireteams were enjoying themselves in their play session. Most gave me the same answer. They were tired of poor quality matches, so they made their own team to avoid the bad solo experience. Consequently, they ran into the same problem that I did, which was the opponents quitting the match before it even began. Ironically, I find the Control playlist has more higher skill players than the competitive playlist, so I can't blame Fireteams for cycling through hundreds of quitters to find the rare other team of similar skill. It would likely take them longer to find that experience in comp. Don't even get me started on trials. If you commit the sin of shooting back at your opponent, you're shamed for stacking and ruining a carry, when we all know that the cosmetics aren't it, and adepts barely do anything. And that same low skill player that they're carrying is just ultimately going to default to Thunderlord in PvE and Osteostriga in PvP. Not to go too much on a tangent, but in the current matchmaking, I match teams more often than not. That shouldn't happen so frequently, it should be a rarity. To avoid talking in circles now, I'll bring this video to a close. I still ultimately enjoy the game, the good aspects still outweigh the bad, but the gap of time between each good moment is getting wider and wider with each mismanagement of PvP in this game, and I hope Final Shape changes the trajectory of this. I know in this video I'm not speaking for all players of all skill levels, but for those of you who find yourself on Skill Island, trouble matchmaking, terrible experience most of the time, for those of you who are fodder backfilling for high skill players, I understand. And I hope that Bungie, like listening to a patient talk to a doctor about how they're feeling, can prescribe some things so that the game feels healthier again. That brings my venting to a close. I'll end the video with a couple cool clips. See y'all in the next.
Did they update Dreaming City public events? What the fuck? Get the... Dude, when did this happen?
Alright, that was a fun match.
think this is like the first time in like a couple hours I've heard you like be happy.